Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Destroy, Erase, Improve by Meshuggah.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So for a while now we've had an hiatus of extreme metal bands, but suddenly we're coming back into that, and despite this not being my favorite type of music in the world, I am grateful to listen to this kind of albums and these kind of songs because it does expand my overall musical horizons. So here are some of my favorite bits from this album, and yes, there are definitely quite a bunch of them. So Meshuggah, which is of course Hebrew for crazy or mad, are a Swedish progressive technical extreme metal band that was formed in the year of 1987, but they will only go to actually release their debut album in the year of 1999, and then out of nowhere they would go on a 4-year unprecedented hiatus before they would release their second album, which is also the one that we are reviewing today, Destroy, Erase, Improve. By the way, I'm saying destroy, erase, improve, but it doesn't have any, like periods or commas. It is just literally destroy, erase, improve. And while going on a 4-year hiatus for a band that just started their musical journey would seem like a bad decision overall, it seems like Meshuggah actually did it right with this hiatus and actually took the time to progress their sound and improve upon themselves before releasing their second album. I can only assume that what Meshuggah wanted to achieve is that when they release the second album of theirs, it wouldn't be just your average extreme metal album, it would be a ground-shaking album, if not even a groundbreaking one. I think that right from the start of this album, the most prominent quality that it has is being very inventive and very experimental, but also very technically impressive. This album is basically known to be an album full of complicated and very tightly played pieces of music, which are all very well known because of their odd and very unlikely to be heard anywhere else back in the day, time signatures. Yes, this entire album could be proud of one thing and definitely be remembered for one thing, and that's its use of time signatures and very odd time signatures in a way that was probably never quite seen before. And while every single track on this album does make use of some sort of odd time signatures, I think that nothing really comes close to the opener for this album, which is of course Future Breed Machine. This track probably doesn't have one consistent time signature for more like than 5 seconds at a time before moving to something completely different. And moreover, Meshuggah's decision to actually start off with this behemoth of a track actually makes all the other tracks, which are definitely very complex and very interesting and very highly well made, seem like they're just lesser in some way. And it's really odd, but this first track is just so impressive, it's so overwhelming the senses that everything that comes after it just doesn't stand up to it. But generally speaking about the album itself, if there's a lot of things that I enjoyed about it, one of them would be that the fact is this album really isn't all that repetitive. Yes, extreme metal can be very bombastic at most instances, but if there's one thing that really comes along with it is being being quite repetitive all along, and this album just really knows how to break things up a bit, and that's something that I personally really appreciate. No, this is not Gentle Giant, they don't change up the musical idea every 2 bars or so, but still, they do spice things up a bit with different sections which have different energies and tones, and that's something that I could really enjoy. If there's one thing that kind of stood out to me as being not that appealing, it has to be the vocals on here, and especially the singing and the way that it is done. Well, I'll take for example the first song, which is, as I said, the most complex piece on this entire album. You have Jens Kidman, who's the one that sings throughout this entire album, and on this first track in particular, it is just so difficult to actually execute vocals correctly because everything is so ever shifting and so hard to keep up with. So what it results in is that basically his vocals sound very much blocky, in which he executes 1 or 2 words at a time in a very, just blocky manner that really isn't that fun to listen to. And yes, I am aware that executing seamless vocals on a track like this is basically close to impossible as you can get, but honestly, it just makes it feel like this was done unprofessionally, and in my personal opinion, they should have just gotten rid of the vocals for this track entirely and keep it for the more simpler tracks to come along later. And on that same note, this album does feature what you'd expect, which is of course growling, but it's some sort of proto-growling in this sense where it is still quite tangible actually and is not that rough, and I could actually listen to this growling of sorts and also quite well understand the lyrics that are being said. But overall, when it comes to this album, I feel like the first track along with maybe 1 or 2 more tracks are the only ones that I can really view as individual tracks on here, because the rest of this album is just one behemoth of an album that flows seamlessly from one track to the other. And the nice thing about this album, which I've already mentioned, is the fact that it knows how to break things up a bit from time to time, because as a whole, an album like this can easily turn into something which is entirely overwhelming and really hard to listen to, especially in one sitting. And we've seen a lot of albums that flaw in this way, like Magma's K.A. or Devin Townsend's Teria, or even Obscura by Gorgut, but this album just knows when to break things up a bit and change the pace in order for it to not feel as repetitive and as overwhelming as it is, because as it happens to be, when extreme metal albums don't know when to take the chill pill, it just feels like you're going through a really bad overdose of music. And one of the things that broke the repetitive nature that could have been this album was the keyboards. Now, usually when it comes down to extreme metal albums, despite keyboards being credited in the credits for the album, I really tend to find it hard to believe that there are actually any keyboards present, because no matter how hard I try and listen to it, I just can't seem to distinguish them out of the mix. But in this case, not only did I actually manage to hear the keyboards in the mix, there were also some keyboard solos throughout this entire album which were definitely quite refreshing. No, these weren't your Rick Wakeman keyboard solos, nothing too over the top, but definitely different enough to make it sound more special. But the thing that I really enjoyed about this album is all the quiet and somber parts on here, and you had a lot of songs which started off that way but then went into their bombastic nature. But then you had one specific song which just broke every rule that this album has already accomplished, and that one is of course Acid Placidity. This track, it started off and remained mostly with an acoustic guitar rhythm that just went along and along, and it just kind of built upon itself with some various ambient noises, and at every single point I was ready for the drums to kick in, the heavy guitars, the bass, everything that has to do with it. But it just never came, and it just remained like that for about 3 minutes and just left us with a really calm song that left us the right and needed time to actually breathe in order to move on to the rest of this album. And as a refresher, I do really appreciate that song, even if it's not that of a masterpiece as a standalone track. And I think this all comes down to the fact that a good album has to have some sort of contrast within it. Repetitiveness is fine in certain sections, bombasticness and over-the-top singing, vocals, instrumentals, everything that has to do with that is just completely fine, but when you don't have contrast, you're just left with an overwhelming sense. And that's exactly what this album knows how to do right. It knows how to break things up a bit in order for the listener to always stay engaged. But all in all, I wouldn't say that I really enjoy this album all that much, but that definitely just comes down down to my personal subjective preferences. I am not a huge metal fan. I opened this review up by saying that it's just something about me. I am definitely sure that people who do like this type of music would find endless things to be enjoyable about this album and many reasons to replay it over and over again. If there's one thing that I have to point out, I do wish that the subject matter of the lyrics in this album was something more than just the dystopian, gory-like subjects that you see in every extreme metal album, but you know what are you gonna do? It's what you'll get. But I'm always really looking forward to see an extreme metal album that deals with really absurd subjects like common household things or even love songs. I think that would be kind of nice, and if anyone knows an album like that, I definitely would like to hear your recommendations. So I don't quite like how this cover looks, but I do like what I see in it. So let me explain. I do like what I see on here because of the idea behind it. So of course you have the 3 stages of the album, which are the title of the album being Destroy, Erase, and Improve. And what really stuck into mind with me was the fact that there is the stage called Erase. Now, why would you need a stage like that? And what I mean by that is, if your goal is to improve the individual, whatever subject you're talking about, wouldn't you want it to still at least exist, even if destroyed, in order to make improvements on it? But apparently this album doesn't think so, and it thinks that you have to completely erase the last thing that you had in order to make an improvement upon it, and that's very interesting, and it just kind of brought it into mind. I do really like the visual representation of each and every one of the phases, being destroy, having this really, fiery, burning, destroy everything, and then the erase one is really interesting because it looks like the figure itself is just coming back into the atomic nature of things. And then of course you have the improve, which has the motherboard or circuit board on it, which definitely has something to do with technology, but I wouldn't go into that. I just think that the imagery is really nice in portraying what the message of this title is supposed to mean. But yeah, as I said, I don't especially like this cover. I think that a better representation would be something more fluid that isn't just 3 black lines that divide everything that has to do with the 3 stages. I think that something which is more integrated would have looked better, but for as it is, this is a fine cover to have. But yeah, this album, purely on a subjective point, will receive a rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to the album called Nude by the band Camel. I can't believe we haven't encountered Camel quite yet on the list, and we're almost 200 episodes into it, and only now are we listening to the first Camel album. Personally, I really like this band, so I'm really looking forward to this one, which I'm really excited for. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Waldem and Wrist of Kings. You are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.